Hey guys, it's Thursday, March 16th, and this is Newswave. So let's jump right into the big topic that happened yesterday. The Switch's SoC was X-rayed, and it turns out it is pretty much the same physically as an X1. This kind of sent a lot of people into kind of a frenzy online about it. A lot of people were obviously speculating heavily about what's inside because Nintendo and Nvidia really didn't leave anyone with any other options since they weren't at all transparent about what was in there. But I think a lot of people are blowing it out of proportion in general because really the X1 is the most capable mobile chip that's available at a consumer level. The TX2 or the Jetson TX2 board is now available for developers. It's starting to ship. And really that means that in about a year to a year and a half, we'll see the X2 start to show up on the marketplace, which means by then Nintendo can look at it and start to consider if they want to do a refresh because, of course, the X2 is more efficient overall and could give better battery life, but they would opt for that probably over performance. Now keep in mind the X1 does still, especially the Switch, has had low-level APIs written for it, so it does support Unreal Engine 4, it does support Vulkan, NVN, a lot of low-level APIs that are usually not available to, say, a regular stock X1 in like a tablet, where it would run like the mobile version of Unreal Engine 4, whereas the Switch runs the actual Unreal Engine 4, and so on. So there is a lot of other things to the Switch that we don't know much about, including its low-level API and its custom operating system. All of that stuff is still kind of cloudy. They're not very transparent, again, with the consumers, whether it's Nvidia or Nintendo. And really, at this point, we have to wait and look at the games that they present to us, especially at E3, where it'll be very important to see if any third parties show up there or if Nintendo puts out any visually impressive games for what's actually in the system, which is pretty impressive if you consider the amount of power it is using and the fact that it can run off of a battery for anywhere from 3 to 6 hours, depending on what you're playing. But just know, guys, it appears to be an X1, 256 CUDA cores, clock speeds that varying right now. Apparently it was underclocked. I do understand it has to be underclocked in handheld mode because, of course, it has to run off battery and it can't die in an hour running at full speeds, maybe less than that. So I get all of that. We'll just have to see which games that are presented to us, especially at E3. E3 will be very big for Nintendo, and just see if they're fun. If they look fun, then we'll play them, right? I mean, if you enjoyed Zelda when it came out, you're probably going to enjoy it tomorrow, even though you know it's next one, or today, even though you know it's next one that's in there. And life will move on. So it's going to come down to what Nintendo ends up doing with the system 3 to 4 years down the road if they do refresh it or if they stick with it and continue to build games. We'll have to see. But it's going to be up to E3 at this point with Nintendo, and they're going to have to bring it. Speaking of games, Blaster Master has been out for a little bit now, and it's been fun, but I was getting kind of frustrated that I could not use my Pro Controller with it. Well, don't worry, Pro Controller Support came out yesterday. You can now get the update. I think it's update 1.1 for Blaster Master Zero, and you can now use the Pro Controller with it, which is great because obviously that game, I think, needs that D-pad because it is an old school style game. Sure, the Joy-Con buttons worked because you don't technically need to roll the D-pad at all, but it's nice to know I can sit down and use my Pro Controller in what is an awesome looking game. So I'm very happy. I actually downloaded the update already, and I've been using the Pro Controller for about an hour now, so it works great. And Media Create came out with the second week in Japan for the Switch's launch, and it looks like the Switch moved more units, despite being pretty much out most places. I'm not really sure how they sold more systems if they sold through 95% of their stock originally, but they did manage to sell 61,998 Switches in that time period overall. This is from, again, Media Create from the time of March 6th to March 12th. And that puts the Switch very close to 400,000 units moved through now. And in the same week, big congratulations to the PS4 with the 28,900 or so units that they moved that same week with the Switch. The PS4 has now passed 4.5 million units sold through. This is in Japan only right now, 4.5 million units sold, which is pretty good for the PS4 overall, considering it's been very strong everywhere, including Japan, and it's going to be good for the PS4 going forward still. And now the PS4 Pro has also, a part of that, has sold 200,000 units in Japan. So very strong for Sony in Japan. It's going to be more interesting going forward, as it does appear that the PS4 is actually slowing in sales in Japan. Now I know in Japan, usually each household generally only has one console for the most part because they are very big on mobile gaming. So it'll be interesting to see how well the Switch continues to sell going forward as supply is given to them. I could see the Switch definitely taking over Japan overall, but right now, man, the PS4 is an insanely good seller, and I don't think anyone can dispute that at all because they keep moving systems despite being out for a while now. So good for Sony. 4.5 million units in Japan is nothing to sneeze at. So congratulations to them. And guys, get ready to be excited because Factor 5 is apparently coming back. And this was revealed to a German website from Julian Egbrecht, and they were talking about Factor 5 in general. And they decided to tell us that they have acquired all rights to the studio and they are coming back, and it appears that they're developing for the Nintendo Switch. Now, if you don't remember Factor 5, they were very well known by a lot of people who had a Gamecube because they developed Star Wars Rogue Squadron 2 Rogue Leader. And of course, they also worked on Turrican, which is a little older. I remember playing that. I know it was on the Amiga and it was on the Genesis, and it was very popular there, especially on the Genesis, as a very good game. But obviously, Rogue Squadron 2 was such a good game, right? I mean, and it's great that they're coming back. Now, I don't think that they will develop another Rogue Squadron-like game, mostly because, obviously, Disney now owns the rights to Star Wars, and it would be probably a pretty big deal to have a smaller Factor 5 type studio go and negotiate with a very big Disney. So I think they'll be making their own game. They could be maybe doing something with Turrican even. It's hard to say. Maybe they bring something back and put it on the eShop as like a Turrican Reborn or something, but that would be a good game too. Just know that they are working on it. They also seem to comment on the Switch's power for some odd reason, but that somehow came up in the interview here. In the interview, he decided to let us know that the Switch is between the Wii U and the Xbox One in terms of power, which I think we all pretty much knew at this point. We know it's stronger than the Wii U, we know it's weaker than the Xbox One, but then they also went on to say that it's very easy to develop for. They seem to mention that it's just like the PS4 in terms of development. I was trying to figure out what he meant by that. I think he means more along the lines of there's no like ES RAM like how the Xbox One has to. It has one pool of RAM that you pull from. That's the only thing I can think of, but they did say it uses all the modern GPU standards, which we already know as well, all the low-level APIs, and overall, it's very easy to develop for, similar to the PS4, and they said in some cases it's actually easier to develop for. So I do think a lot of, like I said, smaller companies will probably develop for the Switch going forward. Great to see Factor 5 back. I hope they do something with Turrican. The dream scenario would be something with Rogue Squadron. That is a little bit of a stretch now that Disney's involved. And if you didn't hear, Kingdom Hearts 1.5 and 2.5 released in Japan on the PS4. And with it came quite a few bugs, apparently, that are still present in the game. So a lot of streamers have been kind of capturing the issues that are going on here. And apparently some of the big problems is, strangely, the going from 30 to 60 frames per second has caused issues with Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2 when it comes to like physics, and certain bosses are behaving very weird, and just potentially some of them are just broken, in fact, and it's very odd that a lot of these kind of fell through the cracks. I do think that Sony has probably, or at least Sony, Square, Disney, they've probably beat the Kingdom Hearts 1 and 2 horse to death at this point. It's a little odd that these bugs slipped through, but it's very particular issues here that are definitely have to do with frame rate and just physics in general. And not only that, but apparently the game itself has a lot of crashing that's going on, like just crashing a lot according to a lot of these streams and the players' experiences with it. So hopefully those get ironed out in a patch going forward, because the game's not out here in the States yet. It's in Japan. Maybe they'd come up with a patch after releasing it and people have played it and we don't have to deal with this. But at this point, I don't know if I'm going to buy Kingdom Hearts 1.5 and 2.5 because I've already bought it on my PS3. I have it on my PS2. So at this point, I'd be buying the game like for the third time. But some people who maybe did not experience it can then play it on the PS4 in one compilation disc. I don't think it's super expensive as compared to a $6 game. I think it's a little less, but either way, it's due out March 28th here, so we'll see at that point, because I'll probably just get it just to try it out, and we can see if the bugs are in it. The last bit of news today comes from the retro scene, actually. This is kind of neat. So you probably remember Primal Rage, the first one, right? It was on the Genesis, it was Super Nintendo. It was a fun game in the arcades. You kind of beat each other up with stop-motion apes and dinosaurs and all kinds of stuff. Well, there was actually a Primal Rage 2. It's something a lot of people don't know about. It was canceled like 20 years ago, and it never saw the light of day. It was never released. But after a while, a couple of the JAMA boards, or the arcade boards, kind of made its way out into the public, and it was actually dumped to a computer. So it's dumped, it's released on the internet, people pick it up, they work on it, and now Primal Rage 2 is completely playable in MAME, which is the arcade emulator. And it actually plays well. Like, better than you'd think it would. Like, it actually works. There's a couple things that are unfinished, menu items, things like that, but you can get it, and you can just play it if you want, and it works fine. It doesn't really crash or anything. There's nothing crazy going on, but it is the successor to Primal Rage. So if you want to maybe get a nostalgia trip, try out a game that was never released, it's worth a look. I mean, it's on there. You can download it, put it on MAME. It was the game that was never released, so it's not a big deal probably if you download it and play it, but it's kind of a neat thing to look at to see what could have been for the arcades back in the day. That's it for Newswave today, guys. Make sure you comment, like, subscribe, all that good stuff. Let me know what you think about any of the stuff we talked about today, whether it's the Switch's X-Ray for that chip, that it's an X1 essentially, and they're going to rely probably on low-level API and cheap dev kits to get people on board. Let me know what you think about Kingdom Hearts crashing, Primal Rage 2 coming out now, which is interesting, or maybe you are really excited about Factor 5 coming back. Let me know what you think they might be working on too, because they haven't really talked about what they're working on. They just said they're working on something for the Switch, so this could be interesting going forward. I don't think it's Rogue Squadron. Maybe Turrican comes back. That'd be cool. Let me know what you guys think down below. I will see you next time.